What happens when the species that holds together an entire galactic civilization simply leaves? For 3 centuries, humanity had been the backbone of the Galactic Council, the engineers who kept the stations running, the diplomats who prevented wars, the innovators who solved impossible problems. They were so reliable, so essential, that the other species took them for granted. Until the day humanity received one insult too many. The Council thought they were irreplaceable. The humans thought they were unappreciated. Both were about to discover how catastrophically wrong they could be. When humanity's final ambassador walked out of the Council chambers, she left behind more than hurt feelings. She left behind a civilization that had forgotten how to function without human ingenuity, human dedication, and human stubbornness to make the impossible work. The Council was about to learn that some species aren't meant to be taken for granted. And humanity? They were about to remember that sometimes walking away is the most powerful thing you can do. Ambassador Sarah Chen stood at the podium in the Grand Council chamber, her hands steady despite the fury building in her chest. Around her, representatives from 47 different species sat in their ornate chairs, their various forms of communication creating a symphony of clicks, whistles, and electronic pulses that the universal translators converted into a cacophony of complaints. The Galactic Council had been humanity's home away from home for 3 centuries. The massive station, built from materials harvested from a dozen worlds and engineered to accommodate life forms ranging from the crystalline Zephyrians to the gas-based Nebula Collective, represented the pinnacle of cooperative achievement. At least, that's what the tourism brochures claimed. Sarah had spent 15 years climbing the diplomatic ladder to reach this moment. She had mediated trade disputes between species who couldn't agree on what constituted matter, had negotiated peace treaties between civilizations that experienced time differently, and had somehow convinced the hive minds to share their agricultural techniques with individual-based societies. She had given her career, her relationships, and her health to this organization. And now she was listening to Councillor Thexmore of the Kalari Federation explain why humanity's request for a simple scheduling accommodation was unreasonable and disruptive to established protocols. The issue was absurdly simple. Humanity had requested that critical infrastructure meetings be scheduled during what most species considered normal working hours, rather than during the middle of human sleep cycles. For 3 years running, every major engineering conference, every emergency repair coordination, every vital systems update had been scheduled when human participants would be fighting exhaustion. It wasn't malicious, Sarah had initially believed. It was just thoughtlessness. After all, humans were the ones who had designed most of the station's critical systems. They were the ones who maintained the artificial gravity generators that kept 47 different species comfortable. They were the ones who had figured out how to make the atmospheric processes work for beings who breathed everything from methane to pure energy. But thoughtlessness, Sarah was beginning to realize, could be its own form of cruelty. The Kalari position, Dexmore continued, his translator rendering his bioluminescent communication patterns into crisp, formal English, is that accommodation requests must be balanced against the needs of the majority. Humanity represents merely 12% of Council membership. To restructure our scheduling protocols for such a small minority would set a dangerous precedent. Sarah felt something cold settle in her stomach. 12%. That's how they saw 3 centuries of human contribution. A minority that needed to be managed. She looked around the chamber at the faces and non-faces of beings she had considered colleagues. The ethereal collective's ambassador existed as a shimmer of controlled energy, their thoughts transmitted through quantum fluctuations that had taken human scientists 50 years to decode. The Gordanian representative was a living mountain of crystallized thought whose every word carried the weight of geological ages. The swarm intelligence of Kepler 442b spoke through a cluster of insectoid forms that moved with perfect coordination. All of them were staring at her with expressions she had learned to read over the years. Impatience, condescension, the particular look that said, "Here we go again with the humans and their demands." Furthermore, added Councillor Yith of the Titanium Synthesis, we must consider the administrative burden. Rescheduling established protocols would require modifications to 17 different computer systems, updates to 43 diplomatic calendars, and retraining for staff across multiple departments. The cost-benefit analysis simply does not support such extensive modifications. Sarah almost laughed. The Titanium Synthesis was complaining about administrative burden to the species that had spent 60 years writing the code that made their 17 different computer systems talk to each other. Humans had created the translation protocols that let Yith's mathematics-based language interface with everything from the hive mind's chemical communications to the pure energy collective's electromagnetic pulses. But what struck her most was the silence from humanity's supposed allies. The Centauri Republic, whose entire trade network relied on human-designed navigation systems, said nothing. The new Terran Federation, which shared Earth's origin but had developed in a different direction after early colonization efforts, remained quiet. Even the silicon mines, artificial intelligences that had been born from human computer science research, offered no support. Sarah had spent 15 years learning the delicate art of diplomatic language. She knew how to phrase disagreements as alternative perspectives and how to present demands as mutually beneficial proposals. She understood the careful dance of implication and suggestion that kept 47 wildly different species working together. But looking around the chamber, seeing the casual dismissal of humanity's contributions, something inside her snapped. "I need to make sure I understand the Council's position," Sarah said, her voice carrying the same professional calm that had served her through countless negotiations. "You're telling me that accommodating the species responsible for 73% of your infrastructure maintenance, 81% of your intersystem communications protocols, and 94% of your emergency engineering responses would be too administratively burdensome." The chamber fell silent. Even the constant background hum of translation algorithms seemed to pause. Councillor Thexmore's bioluminescent patterns shifted to what Sarah recognized as mild irritation. "Ambassador Chen, while we acknowledge humanity's contributions to Council operations, we must also recognize that these systems, once established, require minimal ongoing intervention. The technical expertise needed for maintenance can be acquired by other species through appropriate training programs." There it was, the assumption that had been lurking beneath every decision, every scheduling conflict, every casual dismissal. Humans were useful for building things, but once the building was done, anyone could maintain what they had created. Sarah had been present when the atmospheric processing station for Sector 7 had failed 3 months ago. The multi-species engineering team had spent 6 days trying to restart systems that should have been simple to repair. It had taken Engineer Martinez 18 minutes to identify the problem. Someone had updated the software without understanding how the organic atmospheric components interfaced with the mechanical filtration systems. She had watched as the crystalline hive tried to reprogram the gravity generators for the diplomatic quarters, working for 2 weeks to accomplish updates that Senior Technician Walsh completed in an afternoon, because he understood that the gravity fields weren't just mathematical equations. They were carefully balanced to account for the psychological comfort zones of 17 different species. But apparently, these were just minimal ongoing interventions that any species could handle with proper training. "I see," Sarah said quietly. "And this training that would allow other species to maintain human-designed systems? When does the Council plan to implement it?" Yit's mechanical voice carried a note of satisfaction. "Such training programs will be developed and implemented as resources permit. We estimate a full transition period of approximately 15 to 20 standard years. 20 years. They wanted to keep using human systems for 20 years while slowly, eventually, maybe training other people to replace human engineers. And in the meantime, humans could just accept being treated as temporary help." Sarah looked down at the tablet in her hands, displaying the carefully prepared talking points she had planned to use in this discussion. Proposals for compromise scheduling, suggestions for rotating meeting times, ideas for virtual participation options that would reduce the burden on any single species. She thought about the human engineers working double shifts to keep the station's life support systems running smoothly. She thought about the human diplomats who had spent decades building the relationships that kept trade wars from becoming shooting wars. She thought about the human scientists who had given up research careers to focus on the unglamorous work of making sure 47 different species could live and work together safely. And she thought about the message she had received just that morning from Earth's High Council. After 3 centuries of galactic cooperation, humanity was experiencing problems they had never faced before. Resource shortages as their best and brightest continued to leave for Council positions. Educational systems struggling to train the next generation because experienced teachers were needed to maintain galactic infrastructure. Economic disruptions as human-designed systems throughout the galaxy required constant human oversight. Earth needed their people back. But Earth also believed in the dream of galactic cooperation. They had been willing to continue the sacrifice, to keep sending their best people to maintain the systems that kept the galaxy running, if humanity could receive even basic consideration within the Council structure. Basic consideration like not scheduling critical meetings during human sleep cycles. Sarah set down a tablet and looked up at the assembled representatives. "I have a question for the Council," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber. How many humans currently serve in critical positions throughout Council operations? The question seemed to surprise them. There was a moment of confused communication between various representatives before Councillor Vex, of the Administrative Oversight Committee, activated his display screen. According to our latest personnel reports, Vex said, his translator rendering his complex vibrational language into precise syllables, humans currently serve in approximately 43,000 positions across all Council operations. This includes engineering, diplomatic services, translation services, emergency response, trade coordination, and scientific research. 43,000 people, Sarah repeated. And how many of these positions are classified as essential to ongoing operations? Another pause. More consultation of databases. Approximately 30,000 positions are designated as essential or critical to maintaining current operational standards. Sarah nodded slowly. 38,000 humans keeping the galaxy's largest cooperative venture running smoothly. 38,000 people who could be at home, solving problems for their own species, building a better future for their own world. And the Council's position is that these 38,000 essential personnel should simply accept scheduling that treats them as a minor inconvenience rather than as the backbone of your operations. Ambassador Chen, Thexmore interjected, his patterns shifting to what Sarah had learned indicated official displeasure. Your characterization of the Council's position is unnecessarily inflammatory. We simply must balance multiple competing interests. No, Sarah said, and her quiet word cut through Thexmore's objection like a blade. You don't have to balance anything. You've chosen to prioritize the convenience of 46 other species over the basic professional courtesy owed to the people who keep your lights on. She reached into a briefcase and pulled out a small device, setting it on the podium. It was a simple human data storage unit, containing personnel files, system documentation, and 3 centuries of accumulated knowledge about Council operations. This contains detailed information about every system designed, built, or maintained by human personnel, Sarah said. Security protocols, maintenance schedules, emergency procedures, system specifications, and contact information for the human personnel responsible for each major system. The chamber had gone completely silent now. Even the background hum of life support systems seemed muted. I'm providing this information to the Council as a professional courtesy, Sarah continued, because as of today, the human delegation is withdrawing from the Galactic Council. The explosion of sound that followed was unlike anything Sarah had ever heard in the chamber. 46 different species trying to communicate shock, outrage, and panic simultaneously created a chaos that overwhelmed even the sophisticated translation systems. But Sarah wasn't finished. Effective immediately, all human personnel serving in Council positions are being recalled to Earth for reassignment. Emergency personnel will remain for 72 hours to ensure safe shutdown of critical systems and to provide transition support for any species capable of assuming their responsibilities. She picked up her briefcase and turned towards the exit. The Council has made it clear that human contributions are taken for granted and human needs are considered irrelevant. We choose not to continue working under those conditions. Ambassador Chen. The voice belonged to Councillor Prime Zenth, the ancient leader whose species had founded the Council 3,000 years ago. You cannot simply leave. The stability of the entire galactic community. Sarah paused at the chamber's entrance and looked back at the assembly. Zenth's crystalline form was pulsing with what she recognized as deep distress. Around the chamber, other representatives were frantically consulting displays and communicating with their home governments. Councillor Prime, Sarah said with the formal courtesy that diplomatic training had drilled into her, the Council has just spent an hour explaining why human needs are less important than administrative convenience, why human expertise can be easily replaced through training programs, why the people maintaining your civilization should accept being treated as temporary help. She gestured toward the data storage device still sitting on the podium. You have your training materials. You have 15 to 20 years to become self-sufficient. As Councillor Yeth suggested, humanity wishes the Council success in that endeavor. The chamber erupted again, but Sarah was already walking through the exit. Behind her, she could hear the chaos of 46 species suddenly realizing that their assumptions about human indispensability might have been both correct and irreversible. In the corridor outside, Sarah was joined by Deputy Ambassador Rodriguez and Cultural Attaché Kim. Both carried the same small briefcases, the same professional composure, and the same quiet determination. How did it go? Rodriguez asked. About as expected, Sarah replied. They're convinced they can replace us with training programs. Kim shook her head. 20 years. They actually think they can learn in 20 years what it took us 3 centuries to build. They walked together toward the human quarters, their footsteps echoing in corridors designed by human architects, maintained by human engineers, and kept safe by human security specialists. In a few hours, those specialists would be gone. In 3 days, every human on the station would be heading home. Any word from the other sections? Sarah asked. Rodriguez consulted his tablet. Engineering reports all essential personnel ready for departure. Trade coordination has prepared handover documents for their 17 most critical ongoing negotiations. Emergency Services has identified 43 systems that require immediate attention from qualified personnel. And the other species?
Any of them stepping forward to assume responsibilities.
The Centauri have offered to take over 3 non-essential administrative functions, Kim reported. The Silicon Mines say they need 6 months to analyze the systems before they can commit to anything.
Everyone else is still reviewing the situation. They had reached the human residential section now, and Sarah could see the activity that had been building all day. Personnel packing personal belongings, shipping important equipment back to Earth, and conducting final systems checks. It was orderly, professional, and thorough. Everything the Council had come to expect from human operations. But it was also final. Sarah's assistant, Lieutenant Park, approached with a communication tablet. Ambassador, I'm receiving urgent messages from 37 different Council representatives. They're requesting immediate meetings to discuss alternatives to the current situation. Any of them offering to actually address the scheduling issue that started this? Sarah asked. Park checked the tablet. No, ma'am. They're all focused on finding mutually acceptable solutions to maintain current operational frameworks. Sarah almost smiled. Even in crisis, the Council couldn't bring itself to admit they had been wrong about something as simple as meeting schedules. They wanted to maintain current operational frameworks, which meant keeping everything exactly as it was, but somehow convincing humans to accept being treated as expendable. Send a single response to all of them, Sarah instructed. Thank them for their interest. Inform them that the withdrawal is final, and refer them to the technical documentation we've provided. Any species that needs clarification about specific systems can submit written requests, which we'll address as time permits before departure. Park nodded and moved away to send the messages. Around the residential section, the final preparations continued. Sarah could see Engineer Chen supervising the packing of specialized diagnostic equipment. Cultural Specialist Williams was conducting a final interview with the Council's Xenopsychology Department, ensuring they had proper documentation about human interaction protocols for future reference. It was, Sarah realized, exactly what anyone should have expected from humanity. Even while leaving, even after being insulted and dismissed, they were making sure to leave things as organized and documented as possible. They were taking care of responsibilities they would no longer have, because that's what humans did. The irony wasn't lost on her. The species that the Council considered easily replaceable was demonstrating exactly why they were irreplaceable, right up until the moment they were gone. Her personal communicator chimed with an incoming message from Earth. Sarah recognized the code. It was from the High Council, probably confirming final arrangements for the returning personnel, but when she activated the message, it wasn't what she had expected. Ambassador Chen. The voice belonged to Councillor Martinez of Earth's High Council. We've been monitoring the situation. We want to confirm that this action has Earth's full support. We also want you to know that we've prepared for the consequences. The message continued with details that made Sarah's breath catch. Earth hadn't just been planning for the return of their galactic personnel. They had been preparing for what would happen when 43,000 of their best and brightest came home with 3 centuries of advanced technological knowledge and frustrated creative energy, new research initiatives, infrastructure projects that had been delayed for decades, educational programs that would finally have experienced teachers, medical research that could resume now that their best doctors weren't scattered across the galaxy maintaining life support systems for 46 other species. Earth had been sacrificing its own development for 300 years to support galactic civilization. Now, that sacrifice was ending. Sarah looked around the bustling residential section one more time. In 3 days, all of this would be empty. The Council would have their independence from human minority interests, and humanity would finally have their people back. She wondered if either side had fully understood what they were giving up. But as she watched Engineer Martinez explaining atmospheric processor maintenance to a nervous-looking Centauri delegation, Sarah realized that only one side had ever really been invested in making things work. It was time to see what happened when that investment was withdrawn. Chief Engineer Marcus Webb had been awake for 37 hours, but he couldn't afford to sleep yet. Not when the atmospheric processing station for Sector 12 was showing warning indicators that made no sense, according to any of the diagnostic manuals the Kalari Federation had hurriedly distributed to their engineering teams. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was spending his final hours on the council station fixing problems for the same species that had declared human needs administratively burdensome just 24 hours earlier. But Marcus had signed an oath when he first joined Council Engineering Services, and he wasn't about to break it just because his employers had revealed themselves to be ungrateful. Still, as he watched 3 Kalari technicians struggle with a control interface that he could have fixed in minutes, Marcus felt a grim satisfaction building in his chest. Chief Webb called Technician Yiltar, one of the Kalari engineers who had been assigned to shadow him during the transition period. The atmospheric composition readings are fluctuating in ways our models don't predict. Could you review our calibration? Marcus looked at the display screen Yiltar was indicating. The numbers dancing across it told a story that was both simple and devastating. The atmospheric processing system was slowly failing because no one understood how the organic components interfaced with the mechanical systems. It was, Marcus realized, a perfect microcosm of everything that was about to go wrong. The problem isn't calibration, Marcus explained patiently. The problem is that your models don't account for the biomechanical feedback loops we built into the system 15 years ago. He pointed to a secondary display that showed microscopic organisms living within the filtration system. See those? They're not contaminants. They're part of the design. They process atmospheric waste products that the mechanical filters can't handle, and they adjust their activity based on usage patterns. Yiltar's bioluminescent patterns shifted to what Marcus had learned indicated confusion. But living organisms in a mechanical system? This seems unnecessarily complex. It's only complex if you don't understand how biological and mechanical systems can work together, Marcus replied. Humans have been developing biomechanical hybrid technologies for over 2 centuries. It's more efficient, more adaptable, and more resilient than pure mechanical systems. He gestured toward another section of the processing station. The gravity generators use a similar principle. They're not just mathematical field projectors. They incorporate organic neural networks that automatically adjust for comfort and psychological well-being of different species. The air recycling systems learn and adapt to usage patterns. Even the lighting systems incorporate biological components that adjust spectrum and intensity based on the mental health needs of residents. The 3 Kalari technicians exchanged rapid bioluminescent communications that Marcus's translator rendered as concerned muttering. Finally, Yiltar spoke again. Chief Webb, our training materials don't mention these biological components. How are we supposed to maintain systems we didn't know contained living organisms? Marcus felt that grim satisfaction growing stronger. That's an excellent question. You might want to ask Councillor Thexmore, since he's the one who assured everyone that maintaining human-designed systems would require only minimal technical training. Before the Kalari technicians could respond, Marcus's communicator activated with an urgent message from the station's central command. The voice belonged to Acting Chief of Operations Zexhai, a crystalline hive member who had been promoted to replace the human coordination staff. All engineering personnel to Sector 7 immediately. We have a critical failure in the gravity generation system. This is a priority alpha emergency, Marcus sighed. Sector 7 housed the diplomatic quarters for 17 different species with vastly different gravitational requirements. A failure there wouldn't just be inconvenient. It would be life-threatening for any species that couldn't survive in standard gravity. I have to go, Marcus told the Kalari team. Keep monitoring the atmospheric readings, but whatever you do, don't try to fix the biological components. They're supposed to fluctuate. He headed toward the emergency transport system, but was intercepted by his own assistant, Engineer Sarah Okafor, who looked like she had also been awake for far too long. Marcus, we've got problems, she said without preamble. The transition teams are falling apart. Half the species think they can learn our systems by reading manuals. The other half are panicking because they're realizing how complex everything actually is. They entered the transport pod together, and Marcus programmed it for Sector 7 while Sarah continued her report. Sector 3's life support systems are running on backup power because the Centauri team tried to update the software without understanding the hardware interfaces. Sector 15's Trade Coordination Center has shut down completely because no one knows how to operate the multi-species translation protocols. And don't get me started on what happened when the silicon mines tried to take over the navigation systems. Marcus felt a familiar headache building. How bad is Sector 7? Bad. The gravity generators aren't just malfunctioning. they're doing something that's apparently impossible according to conventional physics. The readings suggest they're creating localized gravitational fields that exist independently of the station's rotation. The transport pod arrived at Sector 7, and Marcus could immediately see the problem. The diplomatic quarters were designed as a complex three-dimensional maze of interconnected chambers, each with its own gravitational environment. The ethereal collective needed 0 gravity. The rock eaters required 3.2 standard gravity. The gas swimmers needed variable gravity that could simulate the tidal effects of their home world's multiple moons. Under normal circumstances, the gravity generation system created smooth transitions between these different environments, allowing diplomats to move freely between chambers while gradually adjusting to different gravitational conditions. It was one of the most sophisticated engineering achievements in the galaxy, requiring precise coordination between dozens of field generators and real-time adjustment based on occupancy and usage patterns. Now, according to the emergency readings, the entire system had gone insane. In Chamber 7A, the Ethereal Collective's ambassador was trapped in a gravitational field that was somehow simultaneously 0 gravity and 2.1 standard gravity, creating a localized space-time distortion that was making their energy-based physiology unstable. In Chamber 7C, the Rock Eater delegation was floating helplessly in what should have been their high-gravity environment. And in the Central Coordination Chamber, a group of panicked technicians from 6 different species was arguing about whose fault it was, while the gravity fluctuated around them in ways that defied basic physics. Marcus found the senior technician in charge, a silicon mine designated TechOp 7, whose usually precise electronic communications were crackling with static that suggested severe stress. "Chief Webb, thank goodness you're here. TechOp." 7's voice was distorted by electromagnetic interference. "The gravity systems have malfunctioned in ways our models suggest should be impossible. We've tried implementing standard repair protocols, but the systems aren't responding to conventional commands." Marcus activated his diagnostic tablet and began pulling up system readings that made his blood run cold. The gravity generators weren't malfunctioning, they were doing exactly what they had been designed to do. But they were doing it based on data inputs that had been completely scrambled by well-meaning technicians who didn't understand what they were looking at. "TechOp 7, Marcus said carefully. "What modifications have been made to the gravity generation software in the last 12 hours? There was a pause that lasted long enough for Marcus to know he wasn't going to like the answer. "We implemented efficiency updates based on power consumption analysis, TechOp 7 replied. "The previous configuration was using 17% more power than theoretical models suggested was necessary. We adjusted the field generation algorithms to eliminate wasteful energy expenditure." Marcus closed his eyes and counted to 10. "TechOp 7, those efficiency updates just disabled the adaptive learning protocols that allow the system to create custom gravitational environments. The wasteful energy expenditure you eliminated was the power required to maintain 17 different gravitational fields simultaneously." He opened his eyes and looked around the chaos. "The system is now trying to create all 17 gravitational environments in the same physical space, which is why you're seeing impossible readings. The gravitational fields are interfering with each other in ways that shouldn't be possible but somehow are." TechOp 7's electronic voice carried what Marcus had learned to recognize as silicon mind embarrassment. "Can the modifications be reversed?" Marcus was already working on his tablet, trying to trace through the changes that had been made to systems he had personally designed 5 years earlier. What he found made his headache worse. "The modifications overwrote the original adaptive algorithms," he said grimly. "The system's learning protocols have been completely deleted. Even if I restore the original programming, it will take weeks for the system to relearn the environmental preferences for 17 different species." He looked around at the chaotic scene. The Ethereal Collective's ambassador was beginning to destabilize in ways that looked genuinely dangerous. The Rock Eaters were showing signs of physiology stress from the unfamiliar gravitational conditions. And the other diplomatic delegations were trapped in their quarters, unable to move safely through the fluctuating gravity fields. "However," Marcus continued, "there is a way to restore functionality immediately. The system can be manually operated using override protocols that bypass the automated learning algorithms." TechOp 7's relief was audible. "Excellent. What are the override protocols?" "The override protocols require continuous manual adjustment by someone who understands the gravitational requirements of all 17 species, the mathematical relationships between overlapping gravitational fields, and the real-time power management needed to prevent system overload." Marcus paused to let that sink in. In other words, the override protocols require a human operator who has been trained in biomechanical engineering and multi-species environmental systems. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of gravitational fields fluctuating in ways that violated several fundamental laws of physics. Chief Webb, Tech Op. 7 said slowly. Are you saying that the gravity generation system requires permanent human oversight to function properly? Not just human oversight, Marcus corrected. Human oversight by someone with specialized training in gravitational engineering and multi-species environmental psychology. There are currently 3 people in the galaxy with those qualifications. 2 of them are on the transport ship heading back to Earth, and the 3rd one is standing right here talking to you. He gestured toward his diagnostic tablet. I can implement the override protocols and stabilize the system temporarily, but maintaining 17 different gravitational environments requires constant adjustment based on occupancy patterns, diplomatic schedules, psychological comfort factors, and power grid fluctuations. It's a full-time job for someone who understands how all these variables interact. Around the chamber, Marcus could see the implications of his words sinking in. The gravity generation system wasn't just another piece of technology that could be maintained through routine procedures. It was a complex integration of mechanical, biological, and psychological elements that required intuitive understanding of how different species experienced and required different environmental conditions. And it was just one system among thousands. Marcus's communicator activated again, this time with multiple urgent messages arriving simultaneously. Emergency calls from the Atmospheric Processing Center. Crisis reports from the navigation systems. Panic messages from the Intersystem Communications Array. Chief Webb. Sarah Okafor's voice came through the communicator with barely controlled stress. We've got cascade failures starting in multiple sectors. The atmospheric processes are destabilizing because someone tried to optimize them without understanding the biological components. The navigation systems are offline because the silicon mines tried to upgrade them with more efficient algorithms. And the communications array is transmitting gibberish because no one knows how to calibrate the multi-species translation protocols. Marcus looked around the chamber one more time. Tech Op. 7 and the other technicians were staring at him with expressions that ranged from hope to desperation. The trapped diplomatic delegations were in immediate danger, and throughout the station, systems designed by human engineers and maintained by human expertise were failing because well-meaning but untrained technicians were trying to improve things they didn't understand. He could fix it. All of it. He had the knowledge, the experience, and the access codes necessary to restore functionality to every failing system on the station. But in 18 hours, he would be on a transport ship heading home to Earth, where his skills would be used to improve human civilization instead of maintaining the infrastructure for species that considered his people administratively burdensome. Marcus activated the override protocols for the gravity generation system and began the complex process of manually adjusting 17 different gravitational fields. It would take him 6 hours to stabilize the diplomatic quarters, assuming no other emergencies interrupted the work. As he worked, he thought about the conversation that had led to this moment. The casual dismissal of humanity's contributions, the assumption that human expertise could be easily replaced, the stunning arrogance of species that had spent 3 centuries relying on human engineering while never bothering to understand how that engineering actually worked. The irony was perfect. The Council had insisted that humans were just a minority whose needs could be safely ignored. Now they were discovering that this minority had been holding their entire civilization together. And in 16 hours, that minority would be gone. Marcus continued his manual adjustments to the gravitational fields, stabilizing the environment for 17 different species who had never bothered to learn how their own life support systems functioned. Around him, technicians from 6 different species watched in fascination as he manipulated forces they couldn't understand using principles they had never studied. When the transport ship left for Earth, it would carry more than 43,000 humans. It would also carry 3 centuries of accumulated knowledge about how to make impossible things work, how to integrate incompatible technologies, and how to create solutions that no one else had thought possible. The Council wanted to believe they could replace human expertise with training programs. Marcus was becoming convinced they were about to discover the difference between reading about engineering and actually being an engineer. The gravity fields finally stabilized, and the trapped diplomats began moving safely between chambers. Tech Op. 7 expressed gratitude and relief that the crisis had been resolved. But Marcus could see the questions forming in the silicon mine's optical processes. Questions about how many other systems depended on human expertise. Questions about what would happen when the humans were gone. questions that would be answered very soon. Counselor Prime Zenth had not experienced genuine fear in over 1,000 years, but as he reviewed the cascade of emergency reports flooding his command center, something very much like terror was crystallizing in his ancient consciousness. The Great Council Station, humanity's greatest engineering achievement and the symbol of galactic cooperation for 3 centuries, was slowly but steadily falling apart. Not from external attack or natural disaster, but from the simple absence of the people who had designed it to work. Zenth's crystalline form pulsed with distressed bioluminescence as he processed the latest reports. In 36 hours since humanity's withdrawal announcement,
they had experienced more critical system failures than in the previous 5 years combined.
and the humans hadn't even left yet. Status report, Zenth commanded, his ancient voice resonating through the command center. Acting Operations Chief HFY, a Kalari Federation administrator who had been promoted to replace the human coordination staff, activated his display with patterns that flickered with barely controlled panic. Counselor Prime, we have active emergencies in 17 sectors. The atmospheric processing systems are operating at 63% efficiency and declining. The gravitational generation network requires manual intervention every 4 hours to prevent cascade failures. The intersystem communications array is functioning but transmitting at only 40% accuracy. Pextai paused, his patterns shifting to what Zenth recognized as deep concern. Additionally, we have confirmed that 41 critical systems across the station are experiencing what Human Chief Engineer Webb has termed deferred maintenance failures. Explain deferred maintenance failures, Zenth ordered. According to Chief Webb, these are systems that have been operating beyond their design specifications for years, maintained only through constant human adjustment and optimization. Without daily human intervention, they will fail sequentially over the next several weeks. Zenth felt his crystalline matrix resonating with something that might have been the ancient equivalent of a headache. How many systems are we talking about? Current projections suggest that 97% of station infrastructure will require emergency repair or replacement within 60 days of human departure. The command center fell silent, except for the background hum of life support systems that were, Zenth realized, probably also dependent on human maintenance. And our progress in training replacement personnel? Hextai's patterns dimmed significantly. Counselor Prime, we have encountered what appears to be fundamental compatibility issues between human engineering approaches and the technical capabilities of other species. This was the conversation Zenth had been dreading. Elaborate. Human engineering appears to be based on integration of biological, mechanical, and digital systems in ways that other species find difficult to comprehend. The crystalline collective understands the mathematical principles but cannot work with biological components. The silicon minds excel at digital optimization but struggle with mechanical interfaces. The organic species understand biological systems but find human mathematical approaches counterintuitive. Hextai activated a secondary display showing personnel assessments. We have successfully trained 17 technicians to perform basic maintenance on human-designed atmospheric processes. However, none of them understand how to modify or repair these systems when problems arise. What about the gravity generation systems? No progress. The gravitational field mathematics require integration of physics, psychology, and biological sciences that no single species appears capable of mastering. Chief Webb estimates that training a non-human technician to operate the gravity generators independently would require a minimum of 15 years. Zenth's bioluminescence shifted to deep, frustrated red. 15 years to train someone to maintain systems that humans built in 3? According to Chief Webb, humans didn't build these systems in 3 years, they built them over 3 centuries, with each generation improving and refining the work of previous generations. The current gravity generation network represents the accumulated knowledge of dozens of human engineers working across multiple decades. The implications of this statement hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Zenth had been alive when the first humans joined the Council 3 centuries ago. He remembered them as an energetic but primitive species, eager to contribute but lacking the advanced technologies of older civilizations. Somehow, without anyone noticing, they had become the technological foundation of galactic civilization. Status of human personnel? Zenth asked. 41,000 humans remain on station, but they are operating in transition mode only. They will provide emergency support until departure, but will not begin any new projects or commit to ongoing responsibilities. Hextai's patterns shifted to something that might have been embarrassment. Additionally, Counselor Prime, we have received formal requests from 32 different species asking for copies of human technical documentation and training materials. And The humans have provided exactly what they promised: complete technical documentation for every system they designed or modified. However, these documents assume knowledge of human engineering principles that apparently no other species possesses. HFY activated another display showing a sample of human technical documentation. Even translated into standard galactic notation, the material was incomprehensible to Zenth. It referenced biological adaptation algorithms, quantum biological interface protocols, and psychological comfort optimization systems. Counselor Prime, HFY continued. I have reviewed human engineering documentation for 17 different systems. Each system appears to be designed not just to function, but to learn, adapt, and optimize itself based on usage patterns and environmental changes. This approach to engineering appears to be unique to humanity. Zenth was beginning to understand the scope of the crisis. Human engineering wasn't just technically advanced, it was conceptually different from how every other species approached technology. They had created systems that thought, learned, and evolved, and they had made this approach look so effortless that no one had noticed how impossible it would be to replicate. What are our options? Zenth asked. Before HFY could respond, the command center's emergency alert system activated with a priority signal that made everyone present freeze. The voice that followed belonged to Chief Medical Officer Yextra of the Healing Synthesis. Command Center, we have a medical emergency in Sector 12. Multiple species are experiencing respiratory distress due to atmospheric contamination. We need immediate atmospheric processing intervention. HFY quickly accessed the relevant systems. Counselor Prime, the atmospheric processing station for Sector 12 is showing failure indicators. The biological filtration components have become unstable. Zenth's matrix resonated with growing alarm. Sector 12 housed diplomatic quarters for 7 different species with highly specific atmospheric requirements. Respiratory failure for any of them could trigger diplomatic incidents that might destabilize treaty relationships throughout the galaxy. Can we get human engineering assistance?
Chief Webb is already en route to Sector 12, but he has informed us that this will be the last emergency repair he can provide.
The transport ship departs in 14 hours. Zenth made a decision that 3 centuries of political experience told him might be the most important of his long life. Contact Ambassador Chen immediately. Request an emergency meeting. Counselor Prime, Ambassador Chen has informed all council representatives that the human withdrawal is final and non-negotiable. Then we're not going to discuss the withdrawal, Zenth said grimly. We're going to discuss terms of surrender. 20 minutes later, Zenth found himself in Conference Room 7. Alpha, a space designed for private diplomatic negotiations. The room's environmental systems automatically adjusted for the optimal comfort of all participants, creating perfect atmospheric conditions, ideal lighting, and precisely calibrated gravitational fields. It was, Zenth realized with bitter irony, a perfect example of human engineering that they would lose in a few hours. Ambassador Chen entered the room with the same professional composure she had maintained throughout this crisis. But Zenth's enhanced perception could detect signs of exhaustion and stress in her posture and movement patterns. Counselor Prime, Chen said with formal courtesy, I understand you wish to discuss something other than the withdrawal decision. Ambassador Chen, I want to discuss the terms under which humanity would consider remaining within the council structure. Chen's expression didn't change, but she took a seat across from Zenth before responding. Counselor Prime, with respect, the time for negotiation ended when the council declared that accommodating human scheduling needs would be administratively burdensome. The withdrawal is final. Ambassador, in the 36 hours since your announcement, we have experienced more critical system failures than in the previous 5 years. Our preliminary analysis suggests that the council station will become uninhabitable within 60 days of human departure. Zenth activated a holographic display showing the cascade failure projections that were keeping him awake despite his species' need for regular regenerative rest. We are not negotiating about scheduling accommodations anymore. We are negotiating about the survival of galactic civilization. Chen studied the projections with the careful attention of someone who understood exactly what she was looking at. These projections assume that no other species can learn to maintain human-designed systems. Can they? Zenth asked bluntly. The silence that followed was answer enough. Ambassador Chen, Zenth continued, I have spent the last day reviewing 3 centuries of council records. Human contributions to council operations are not 12%, as we stated in yesterday's session. Human contributions are 94% of everything that makes this organization function. He activated another display showing personnel statistics, engineering reports, and operational dependencies. Humans designed our life support systems. Humans created our communications protocols. Humans developed our transportation networks. Humans established our trade coordination systems. Humans built our diplomatic facilities. And humans have been maintaining all of it for 300 years while we took credit for a galactic civilization we never could have created without them. Chen's professional composure cracked slightly. Counselor Prime, if you understood this, why did the Council refuse to accommodate basic requests for scheduling consideration? Xanth's bioluminescence dimmed with what his species experienced as shame. Because we didn't understand it. We saw humans as useful contributors, not as the foundation of everything we had built. We thought human systems were just advanced technology that anyone could maintain with proper training. He gestured toward the failure projections still hovering in the air between them. We were wrong. Human systems aren't just advanced technology. They're a completely different approach to engineering that integrates biological, mechanical, and psychological elements in ways that no other species has ever achieved. Chen leaned back in her chair, and for the first time since the crisis began, Xanth saw something other than professional diplomacy in her expression. There was sadness there, and disappointment, but also something that might have been hope. What exactly are you proposing, Counselor Prime? Xanth had prepared for this moment, but actually saying the words still felt like a fundamental shift in how the universe worked. I am proposing that the Galactic Council formally recognize humanity as the senior partner in this organization. Not as a 12% minority, but as the species upon which all other species depend for technological civilization. He activated a new display showing proposed organizational changes. I am proposing that human scheduling needs take priority over all other considerations, that human technical requirements become the standard for all council operations, that human engineering approaches become the foundation for all future technological development. Chen was studying the proposal with the careful attention of someone who had spent 15 years learning to read the subtleties of interspecies negotiation. And in return? In return, humanity agrees to maintain the technological foundation of galactic civilization, not as a favor to other species, but as the acknowledged leaders of an organization that exists to support human goals and human values. The proposal hung in the air between them like a gravity field waiting to collapse into something stable or catastrophic. Counselor Prime, Chen said slowly, what you're describing isn't membership in the Galactic Council. What you're describing is human leadership of the Galactic Empire. Xanth's crystalline matrix pulsed with ancient resignation. Ambassador Chen, that's what we already have. We just never admitted it to ourselves. The room fell silent except for the background hum of life support systems that were maintaining perfect environmental conditions through technology that only humans truly understood. I need to consult with Earth, Chen said finally. How long? Xanth asked. Chen checked her chronometer. The transport ship departs in 12 hours. I can get a decision from Earth in 8 hours, but only if you can guarantee that no critical systems will fail while we're negotiating. Xanth's bioluminescence shifted to grim determination. I'll personally ask Chief Webb to delay his departure and provide emergency support for 48 hours. And if Earth agrees to your proposal, then we spend the next year restructuring galactic civilization around the reality that humans are in charge, instead of the fiction that this is a partnership of equals. Chen stood and moved toward the exit, then paused. Counselor Prime, why now? You could have offered this arrangement at any time in the last 3 centuries. Xanth's response carried the weight of 1,000 years of political experience and 36 hours of catastrophic revelation. Because, Ambassador Chen, we never understood what we had until we were about to lose it. The emergency session of Earth's High Council convened at 0347 hours Greenwich Standard Time, with representatives participating via quantum entanglement communication from across human space. President Maria Santos looked at the faces appearing in holographic displays around the council chamber, some alert despite the early hour, others clearly awakened by urgent messages that had traveled faster than light across impossible distances. The irony wasn't lost on her that they were using communication technology, originally developed to coordinate with the Galactic Council to decide whether humanity would continue participating in that same council. Before we begin, President Santos said, I want to confirm that everyone has reviewed Ambassador Chen's report and Counselor Prime Xanth's proposal. Nods and affirmative gestures came from around the virtual table. Dr. James Liu, Director of Galactic Affairs, activated his display to show the key points. To summarize, Dr. Rutkov, Liu said the Galactic Council is offering to restructure their entire organization around human leadership. They want us to become the senior species with human scheduling, human technical standards, and human engineering approaches taking priority over all other considerations, in exchange for not leaving them to die when their technology stops working, added Defense Minister Catherine Wright with barely concealed satisfaction. The question before us, President Santos continued, is whether we accept this offer or proceed with the withdrawal as planned. The silence that followed was broken by Admiral Chen Rodriguez, head of Colonial Defense. Madam President, has anyone calculated what we're giving up if we stay? Economics Minister David Park activated his own display. I've been running preliminary numbers based on the personnel currently serving in council positions. If 43,000 of our best engineers, scientists, and coordinators return to Earth immediately, we're looking at the largest technological advancement opportunity in human history. The numbers Park displayed made everyone present take notice. Infrastructure projects that had been delayed for decades could be completed in years. Research initiatives that had been stalled by lack of qualified personnel could resume immediately. Educational systems that had been struggling with teacher shortages could suddenly access the most experienced professionals in human space. These are people with 3 centuries of accumulated experience in advanced engineering, interspecies coordination, and technological problem-solving, Park continued. If they come home now, we can accelerate human development by perhaps 50 years. And if they stay? Asked Dr. Liu. If they stay, they spend their careers maintaining alien technology for aliens who apparently never bothered to understand how it works. The weight of that statement settled over the council chamber like a dense atmospheric layer. President Santos had spent her political career advocating for human participation in galactic civilization, believing that cooperation and collaboration served humanity's long-term interests better than isolation. But the numbers Park was showing forced her to confront an uncomfortable truth. Cooperation required partners who actually cooperated. What about Earth's strategic interests? Asked Minister Wright. If we become the senior species in the Galactic Council, we essentially control galactic civilization. That's not cooperation, that's empire. Is that necessarily a bad thing? The question came from Dr. Sarah Martinez, Director of Scientific Development. For 3 centuries, we've been sharing our most advanced technologies with species who then use those technologies while treating us as junior partners. Maybe it's time to acknowledge that human technological approaches are superior and organize galactic civilization accordingly. President Santos found herself considering possibilities she had never seriously contemplated. Human empire. Not conquest through military force, but leadership through technological indispensability. Ambassador Chen, President Santos activated the communication link to the council station. You've been dealing with these species for 15 years. What's your assessment of Councillor Prime Sen's proposal? Chen's image appeared in the center of the chamber, transmitted across impossible distances through human-designed communication systems that apparently no other species could properly maintain. Madam President, Councillor Prime Zenth is offering us exactly what we've earned through 3 centuries of contribution to galactic civilization. The question is whether we want to claim it. Meaning? Meaning that we already are the dominant species in the galaxy. We just never acted like it. Every major technological system, every critical infrastructure component, every essential service that keeps galactic civilization running was designed by humans and is maintained by humans. Chen activated a display visible to the Earth Council. The other species have been living in a fantasy where this is a partnership of equals. The reality is that this is a human technological empire with 46 client species who contribute culture, art, philosophy, and raw materials while we provide the engineering that makes their civilization possible.
The bluntness of Chen's assessment was startling, but President Santos couldn't find factual errors in it.
What are the risks if we accept Zen's proposal? Dr. Liu asked. The primary risk, Chen replied, is that we become responsible for the welfare of 46 different species across hundreds of worlds. If we accept leadership of the Galactic Council, we accept responsibility for maintaining the technological civilization that keeps all of them alive and prosperous. And the risks if we refuse? Galactic civilization collapses within a year, possibly sooner. The Council station becomes uninhabitable within 60 days. Trade networks fail as navigation systems stop functioning. Atmospheric processing facilities across dozens of worlds break down because no one knows how to maintain them. President Santos felt the weight of the decision settling on her shoulders. Accept, and humanity becomes responsible for an interstellar empire spanning hundreds of worlds and dozens of species. Refuse, and billions of sentient beings suffer as their technological civilization collapses. Time factors? She asked. Chief Webb has agreed to provide emergency technical support for another 36 hours, but he can't maintain critical systems indefinitely. If we're going to accept Zenth's proposal, we need to decide within the next 18 hours. Minister Park activated another display. Madam President, I think we need to consider a third option.
Which is?
Selective acceptance. We agree to maintain critical life support and safety systems for all Council species, but we withdraw human personnel from non-essential operations. Keep people alive, but let them handle their own politics, trade negotiations, and cultural affairs. Martinez leaned forward. That could work. We maintain the technological infrastructure that prevents mass casualties, but we're not responsible for running every aspect of their civilization. It also lets us bring home about 20,000 personnel immediately, Park added. Engineers and scientists working on non-critical systems could return to Earth while life support specialists remain in place. President Santos found herself considering the implications of each option. Full acceptance meant human empire, and all the responsibilities that came with it. Full withdrawal meant potential humanitarian catastrophe. Selective acceptance meant finding a middle ground that might satisfy no one but could save lives while advancing human interests. Admiral Rodriguez, what are the security implications of each option?
Full acceptance makes us the hegemon of the galaxy, which historically creates its own security challenges.
Other species might resent human dominance and work to undermine it. Full withdrawal eliminates those concerns but could create refugee crises and regional conflicts as technological civilization breaks down. Rodriguez activated a strategic display. Selective acceptance might be the most strategically sound option. We maintain enough presence to prevent humanitarian disasters, but we avoid taking responsibility for every political dispute and resource conflict in the galaxy. The debate continued for another hour, with council members raising practical concerns, ethical questions, and strategic considerations. But President Santos found herself returning to one fundamental question. What did humanity owe to species that had spent 3 centuries benefiting from human technology while treating humans as expendable? The answer, she realized, wasn't about what humanity owed to other species. It was about what humanity owed to itself. Final positions, President Santos said. Dr. Hook, Liu, full acceptance. If we're already the technological foundation of galactic civilization, we should acknowledge it and organize accordingly. Half measures just create confusion and resentment. Minister Wright? Selective acceptance. We maintain critical systems to prevent humanitarian disasters, but we don't take responsibility for running alien governments. Minister Park? Full withdrawal. Bring our people home and let humanity benefit from 3 centuries of accumulated knowledge and experience. The votes continued around the table, splitting almost evenly between the 3 options. President Santos found herself in the position of casting the deciding vote on a decision that would shape humanity's relationship with the galaxy for centuries to come. She thought about the 43,000 humans currently maintaining the technological civilization that kept billions of aliens alive and prosperous. She thought about the species that had casually dismissed human needs as administratively burdensome while depending completely on human expertise. She thought about the opportunities that would open for humanity if their best and brightest came home to solve human problems instead of alien ones. But she also thought about the responsibility that came with power and the long-term consequences of decisions made in moments of justified anger. My decision, President Santos said finally, is conditional acceptance of Councillor Prime Zenth's proposal, with modifications. She activated a display showing her proposed structure. We accept leadership of the Galactic Council, but we restructure it as a human-led technological confederation. Human interests take priority in all decisions. Human scheduling and standards become the baseline for all operations. And human personnel are no longer volunteers. They're compensated appropriately for maintaining the technological foundation of galactic civilization. What kind of compensation? Dr. Martinez asked. Resource extraction rights from any world that uses human-maintained technology. Preferential trade status for human colonies and corporations, and formal recognition that human technological approaches are the standard for galactic civilization. President Santos looked around the council chamber. We accept responsibility for keeping them alive, but we stop pretending this is an equal partnership. It's a human empire with client species, and it's organized accordingly. The vote was unanimous. President Santos activated the communication link back to Ambassador Chen. Ambassador, please inform Councillor Prime Zenth that Earth accepts his proposal with the modifications I'm transmitting now. Humanity will lead the Galactic Council, but as an empire, not as a partnership. Chen's image showed the first genuine smile President Santos had seen from her in months. "Understood, Madam President? Should I assume that the withdrawal is cancelled?" "The withdrawal is cancelled, but Ambassador Chen, make sure Councillor Prime Zenth understands that the humans returning to Council service are not returning as volunteers. They're returning as the acknowledged leaders of galactic civilization." "Copy that, Madam President. I think the Council is finally ready to accept that reality." As the communication link closed, President Santos looked around the Council chamber one more time. In the span of a few hours, humanity had transformed from junior partners in galactic civilization to the acknowledged rulers of an interstellar empire. The irony was that nothing had actually changed, except everyone's willingness to admit what had always been true. Humanity had been running the galaxy for 3 centuries. Now they were just going to do it officially. 6 months later, Ambassador Sarah Chen stood in the same council chamber where humanity had been dismissed as a mere 12% minority, but the room itself had been transformed in ways that would have been unthinkable during the previous 3 centuries of equal partnership. The most obvious change was architectural. The circular chamber that had once seated all species as equals now featured a raised central platform where human representatives conducted business, surrounded by tiered seating arranged according to each species' level of technological dependence on human systems. The crystalline collective, silicon mines, and other species with some technical capabilities sat closest to the human platform. The purely organic species and energy-based entities occupied the outer rings. But the real transformation wasn't in seating arrangements. It was in how business was conducted. "The next agenda item," Sarah announced, "is the request from the Kalari Federation for technical assistance in upgrading their atmospheric processing systems across 17 colony worlds." She activated a holographic display showing the Kalari proposal, which would have been a complex multi-species negotiation 6 months earlier. Now it was a straightforward request for human services with clearly defined compensation. "Director Martinez from Human Colonial Engineering has reviewed the request," Sarah continued. "Director?" Elena Martinez, who 6 months earlier had been maintaining council systems as a volunteer, now held the title of Director of Technological Development for the Human Galactic Administration. Her presentation was crisp, professional, and completely lacking in the deferent tone that had once characterized human interactions with council species. "The Kalari request involves upgrading 17 atmospheric processing facilities to human biomechanical hybrid standards," Martinez reported. "Estimated completion time is 14 months, with current personnel allocation. Human technical requirements include exclusive mining rights to rare earth deposits on 3 Kalari worlds, plus compensation of 400,000 tons of processed metals annually for the duration of the 30-year service contract." There was no debate, no lengthy discussion of mutual benefit or shared responsibility. The Kalari representative, Councillor Thexmore, the same individual who had declared human scheduling needs administratively burdensome, simply activated his acceptance indicator. The transformation in Thexmore's attitude had been one of the most dramatic changes following the restructuring. 6 months ago, he had been an arrogant administrator, confident that his species could easily replace human expertise. 3 weeks into the transition period, when Kalari colony worlds began experiencing life support failures, his tone had changed dramatically.
Next item, Sarah continued. Resource allocation requests from the Centauri Republic for human assistance in establishing trade navigation systems for their new commercial routes. This too had been simplified. Instead of complex negotiations about shared benefits and mutual cooperation, it was a straightforward transaction: human technical services in exchange for clearly defined compensation.
The efficiency was remarkable. Business that would have taken weeks of careful diplomacy under the old system now took minutes of direct negotiation. Without the pretense of equal partnership, both humans and client species could focus on practical arrangements that served everyone's actual interests. But the most significant change wasn't in the council chamber. It was in the reports flowing back to Earth from across human space. Sarah's personal tablet displayed updates that would have been impossible 6 months earlier. The 30,000 humans who had returned to Earth were transforming human civilization at a pace that exceeded every projection. Infrastructure projects completed in months instead of years. Scientific research advancing at unprecedented rates. Educational systems suddenly staffed with the most experienced professionals in human space. Earth's population was experiencing the most rapid improvement in living standards in human history, powered by the return of expertise that had been scattered across the galaxy for 3 centuries. At the same time, the 13,000 humans who had remained in Council service were operating under completely different conditions. No longer volunteers maintaining alien systems out of idealistic commitment to galactic cooperation, they were well-compensated professionals managing the technological infrastructure of humanity's interstellar empire. The psychological difference was enormous. Human engineers who had once been treated as helpful technicians were now acknowledged as the indispensable foundation of galactic civilization. Human coordinators who had been expected to defer to alien preferences now set the standards that everyone else followed. The results spoke for themselves. System failures that had been routine under the old management structure had virtually disappeared. Efficiency improvements that had been impossible when humans were junior partners were being implemented across all major systems. The Council station itself was operating at higher performance levels than anyone had thought possible. Final agenda item, Sarah announced. The proposal from the Ethereal Collective for establishment of a joint research initiative into quantum consciousness studies. 6 months ago, this would have been presented as an opportunity for mutual scientific advancement, with humans providing technical support while other species contributed theoretical expertise. Now it was a business proposition with clear terms. The Ethereal Collective requests human assistance in developing technological interfaces for quantum consciousness research. Sarah read from the proposal. In exchange, they offer exclusive access to their consciousness manipulation techniques for potential human applications. James Park, who had once been a volunteer researcher studying alien psychology, now held the title of Director of Xenological Studies for the Human Galactic Administration. His assessment was straightforward. The Ethereal Collective's consciousness techniques could advance human understanding of mental enhancement and cognitive optimization by decades. Recommended approval, with standard technical compensation requirements plus exclusive licensing rights for any resulting technologies. The Ethereal Collective's ambassador, a shimmering energy pattern that communicated through controlled electromagnetic fluctuations, signaled acceptance without discussion. This was perhaps the most remarkable change of all. 6 months ago, research collaborations had been structured as equal partnerships where humans provided most of the practical work while other species retained ownership of resulting discoveries. Now, any research that utilized human technical expertise resulted in human-controlled technology. The client species had accepted this arrangement because the alternative was no advanced technology at all. As the session concluded, Sarah reflected on the path that had brought them to this point. The transformation hadn't been imposed through military conquest or economic coercion. It had happened because everyone involved had finally acknowledged a reality that had been true for 3 centuries. Human technological capabilities were the foundation of galactic civilization. The only change was that humans were no longer pretending otherwise. Ambassador Chen, the voice belonged to Counselor Prime Zenth, whose crystalline form had lost much of its ancient luminescence over the past 6 months. "Might I request a private conversation?" Sarah nodded and followed Zenth to Conference Room 7. Alpha, the same space where they had negotiated humanity's new status 6 months earlier. The environmental systems automatically adjusted to optimal conditions for both participants, another reminder of human engineering that no other species could replicate. "Ambassador," Zenth began, "I wanted to discuss the upcoming review of Council Charter modifications. The Charter review represented the final step in formalizing humanity's leadership of galactic civilization. Once ratified, it would establish the legal framework for what everyone already acknowledged. Humans were in charge, and everyone else was along for the ride." "What specific concerns does the collective have?" Sarah asked. Zenth's bioluminescence flickered with what she had learned to recognize as ancient regret. "Ambassador, I find myself wondering if we have traded one problem for another. 6 months ago, we were a confederation of equals who failed to appreciate our most important members. Now we are a human empire with client species who have no meaningful autonomy." Sarah considered this carefully. It was a fair point, and one that Earth's leadership had debated extensively. "Counselor Prime, what autonomy did other species actually have under the old system? You couldn't modify your own life support systems without human assistance. You couldn't maintain your own transportation networks without human expertise. You couldn't even keep your diplomatic facilities functioning without human engineers." She gestured towards the room's environmental systems. "The only difference between now and 6 months ago is that we've stopped pretending you had choices you never actually possessed." Zenth's crystalline matrix resonated with what might have been the ancient equivalent of a sigh. "Perhaps. But there is something to be said for the dignity of illusion." Quote, "Counselor Prime, what dignity was there in treating the people who kept you alive as an administrative inconvenience?" The silence that followed carried the weight of 3 centuries of unacknowledged dependence and 6 months of reluctant acceptance. None, Zenth admitted finally. There was no dignity in that. Sarah felt something that might have been sympathy for the ancient being. Zenth's species had been spacefaring for thousands of years before humans developed agriculture. They had built the original council as a forum for ancient civilizations to share wisdom and coordinate peaceful development. But wisdom and experience meant nothing when the life support system stopped working. Counselor Prime, the client species retained complete autonomy over their own internal affairs. Human authority extends only to technological systems and interspecies coordination. Your species can govern themselves however they choose, practice whatever cultural traditions they value, and pursue whatever philosophical goals they consider meaningful. As long as we acknowledge human technological supremacy, as long as you acknowledge technological reality. Sarah activated a display showing the current status of galactic civilization. Trade networks functioning at unprecedented efficiency, communication systems operating with near-perfect reliability, life support infrastructure maintained at optimal performance across hundreds of worlds. This isn't about human supremacy, Counselor Prime. This is about organizing galactic civilization around the reality that one species happens to be exceptionally good at making complex systems work reliably. Zenth studied the display with ancient eyes that had watched the rise and fall of civilizations across millennia. And what happens when humans decide they no longer need the rest of us? It was the question Sarah had been expecting for months. The fear that drove much of the resentment still simmering among some client species. Counselor Prime, humans have been capable of abandoning the rest of the galaxy for 3 centuries. We could have withdrawn our expertise, taken our technology, and focused exclusively on human development at any time. She gestured toward the display showing improvements to Earth and human colonies. We're more capable of independence now than we've ever been. If we wanted to abandon galactic civilization, we would have done it 6 months ago. Then why maintain the Empire at all? Sarah considered how to explain human motivations to a being whose species had never developed the particular form of stubborn idealism that characterized humanity. Because humans are incapable of watching preventable suffering without trying to fix it. Because we've spent 3 centuries building something remarkable, and we're not willing to let it collapse just because other species took us for granted. She paused, then continued with the honesty that had replaced diplomatic, careful phrasing since the restructuring. And because managing galactic civilization gives humanity access to resources, knowledge, and opportunities that we wouldn't have if we focused exclusively on human space. This arrangement serves human interests as well as everyone else's. Zenth's bioluminescence shifted to something that might have been ancient amusement. So human empire is motivated by both altruism and self-interest. Counselor Prime, those are the most durable motivations for any political arrangement. The charter review session convened the following day with representatives from all 46 client species participating via quantum communication from across the galaxy. The legal framework being ratified was complex, but its essence was simple. Formal recognition that humanity was responsible for maintaining the technological foundation of galactic civilization, with appropriate authority and compensation for that responsibility. The vote was unanimous, not because every species was enthusiastic about human leadership, but because everyone understood that the alternative was technological collapse. As Sarah watched the final ratification, she thought about the path that had brought them to this point. A simple scheduling disagreement had revealed the fundamental inequality underlying 3 centuries of supposed partnership. Humanity's decision to walk away had forced everyone to confront the reality of technological dependence. The result was an arrangement that was probably more honest than what had come before. Humans were in charge because humans were indispensable. Client species accepted this because the alternatives were unacceptable. It wasn't the galactic cooperation that idealistic humans had dreamed of 3 centuries earlier, but it was sustainable, efficient, and based on mutual recognition of actual capabilities and needs. The human galactic administration would never be the partnership of equals that the original council had claimed to be,
But it might be something more durable, an empire based on competence rather than conquest, where the ruling species maintained power by making everyone else's lives better rather than worse.
6 months after walking away from the council chamber in frustration, humanity had returned as acknowledged rulers of galactic civilization.
The galaxy was finally organized around the reality that had been true for 3 centuries. And for the first time since joining galactic civilization, humans were getting the recognition they had earned through 3 centuries of keeping everyone else alive. It was, Sarah reflected, not the outcome anyone had planned, but perhaps the outcome everyone had actually needed.